After a very stimulating session in the morning, we move on to our second lecture by Professor Rohan D'Souza. So could I request, this session will be chaired by Professor Sabyasachi Basu Rai Chaudhuri. So could I request Professor D'Souza and Professor Basu Rai Chaudhuri to please come to the dais. Professor Basu Rai Chaudhuri does not need an introduction. Our former Vice Chancellor, our mentor, our guide, father figure, our tremendous source of energy that we derive from him. So we would like to felicitate Professor Basu Rai Chaudhuri. Would I request Ms. Shoili Dash to felicitate Professor Basu Rai Chaudhuri? So without much ado, I shall hand over the microphone to the chair.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Shahar Ahmed and Dr. Shubhobruto Sarkar and all their esteemed colleagues in the Department of Environmental Studies and Department of History of this university for giving me this opportunity to moderate this special lecture to be delivered by Dr. Rohan D'Souza. And the topic, I think, is very interesting. Fact and fiction is research required for a PhD in the social sciences and humanities. What could be a better topic at this moment? And Dr. Rohan D'Souza, you may already be aware, but even then, let me introduce him very briefly. Dr. Rohan D'Souza teaches the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies in Kyoto University in Japan. He is an environmental historian by profession. His areas of interest include climate change, politics in the Anthropocene, and higher education in the digital age. Rohan is a regular contributor to the press in India and to several online web portals and politics and the environment. He has authored Drowned and Damned, which is a classic book, Colonial Capitalism and Flood Control in Eastern India, published by Oxford University Press in 2006. He has also co-edited the book entitled The British Empire and the Natural World, Environmental Encounters in South Asia, published again by OUP, Oxford University Press in 2011, and Empire, Forests and Colonial Environments in Africa, the Caribbean, South Asia and New Zealand, published by Primus in 2020. So I will not stand between Dr. D'Souza and you, and I would request Dr. Rohan D'Souza to deliver his special lecture.
Thank you again for the introductions, and I'd like to just discuss a few things before my presentation starts. I've often had to deal with lots of people who want to do a PhD and then go around trying to figure out what it means, and that includes me. I think I began to get a sense of what research is only after I finished my PhD, frankly speaking. Yeah, so let me now try and just offer a kind of a systematic understanding of what this means. By the way, this is part of a lecture that I do annually at my graduate school in Kyoto. All right, let me just quickly start. Oh, right, I shouldn't forget this. Okay, so on last count, sorry, this doesn't work. Let's just see. Okay, yeah, okay. On the last count, apparently there are 3,243,672 ways to write a PhD in the social sciences. Yes, I'm joking, obviously. Yeah. What I'm basically saying is that there are various different ways to do a PhD, and I'm going to be discussing only one. All right. But I think it's the more, to the best of my understanding, this would be a kind of a more rigorous way of thinking about this subject. All right. My favorite anecdote, if some of you are familiar, so Ludwig Wittgenstein had written this book called Tractatus. And after writing the book and it being published, a few people had basically begun to read it. And one of his mentors was Bertrand Russell, and G.E. Moore, another very famous philosopher. And for several reasons, they had to award him a PhD because they wanted to pay him a stipend. He wasn't receiving any money, and he was actually he came from a very rich family, but he wasn't taking money from his family. And so they organized a interview of the book, which as a PhD, and Wittgenstein, of course, was very eccentric as a person. So he initially didn't sit down, but then he began to sit down, and then the protocol required them to ask him questions. And after some time, without answering the questions, he just got up and he tapped the shoulder of Bertrand Russell, and he said, "Don't worry, I know you'll never understand it." They awarded him the PhD because he was so bright. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not suggesting that everyone should be a Wittgenstein, but I'm just saying the PhD process is full of stories and very complex. So I want you to be attentive to the diversity as much as some kind of protocol. It's not something that one can simply put out in a formulaic way. So all right. So what is a PhD? If you don't mind, faculty members, please don't raise your hands. But if you were a student and somebody says, "I'm in a PhD program," what do you think would be your reply? They say, "What is a PhD?" But technically, what is a PhD? That's okay. I didn't know it when I was doing my PhD, but a bad guess or a wrong guess is equally good. If somebody says, "What is a PhD?" Sorry? Is there a mic? Maybe you can give it to... Yeah. Yeah, a hand mic. I'm sorry, this is being recorded. It's not good. I would like to pose several questions because it's really very interesting how sometimes we don't really confront questions. It's like fish being asked, "What is water?" Right? Because we're in it. So what is a PhD? Just hand the mic to someone maybe. Is anyone willing to take a chance with that question? Okay, let me give you the technical answer to this. So a PhD is the highest degree that is awarded in an academic discipline for, and here's the catch, for original contribution to research in your field. Okay, so not only is it the highest degree, but you must have an original contribution to your field. Yeah. So now I forgot to include this in the slides, but when people say, "What is an academic discipline?" what does that mean? Anyone? I mean, say an academic discipline. What does it mean? Because in school, you learn subjects. In the university, you learn disciplines. There's a big difference. So in school, a subject is really like the subject of history. It's a very practical, pragmatic understanding of history, and often completely different, not often, entirely completely different when you get to the college level. Yeah. So what is the academic field? Any idea? Okay, an academic field is defined by its object of study. So the academic field of history, the object of study is the past. Economics, the object of study is the economy. Sociology is society. Yeah? Political science is politics. Now, once you have the object of study, then around that object, there are theories, there are claims, there are arguments, there are theories, there are facts. Okay? So an academic discipline can have subfields, like history of science is a field within the discipline or the academic discipline of history. Yeah, right? So when you write a PhD, you must be very attentive to what field or what discipline your contribution is. So if I was to study poverty, for example, I would write a very different PhD in economics, and I would write a very different PhD if I was in history, and a very different PhD if I was doing in political science, because my object of study is different, right? So maybe in economics, I would look at inequality. Maybe in history, I would look at poverty as a problem of a kind of culture of what it is to be poor, yeah, across time, right? So the academic field is something that you must be very attentive to in terms of your contribution, right? Don't simply say, oh, I've submitted it in the history department, and but basically when you explore it, it might look like, it sounds more like your object of inquiry is geography or sociology, yeah. Now, that having been said, um, the PhD's main purpose is to essentially convince people to see the world as you see it, right? It's a very responsible decision that in a very responsible way, you are going to convince people to look at the world differently, yeah? So when you're doing your PhD, it's a sense of commitment to understanding that what you will say will have implications and consequences for people who will understand the world that you now see differently, yeah? Now, this is an equally tough question. What is academic research? Why is academic research not the same as research? Anyone? Any idea? Again, this is something that I've had to really study carefully. But if I was to answer this question wrongly, what would I say? Why is academic research not the same as research? Okay, let me walk you through one of the big mistakes that people make. Academic research is not problem solving. If somebody says, Professor D'Souza, I want to work on poverty because I want to solve it, I would say, go and work for the World Bank, work for the government. That is not the way you pursue your PhD. Okay? Simply because problem solving is for reports and for documents. All right? And it's what journalists, lawyers, analysts, doctors, engineers, or government can do, problem solve. Yeah? Once they are given the question and they search out the facts, they usually compare the facts, and they do not question the question. All right? So you say the plumbing in Lakeside City is bad. We're going to ask a couple of engineers to research why it's happening, and they are going to go and solve it. That is not academic research. All right? That is problem solving. And I would also say this much, that whenever you are asked to solve a problem, please charge a lot of money. Yeah? That's a professional activity. Now, as far as academic research is, which is a thesis or a dissertation, not a report or a document. In a thesis and in a dissertation, you really go about establishing what is a good problem to have. Your thesis or your dissertation is considered rewarding and considered significant if you present us with a new problem and you establish why it's a good problem to have, right? For example, if I was to look at the relationship of wood and shipping, and I see decline of forest cover and the inability to build ships, the implications of that could be many. It could be that colonialism, which starts out in the 16th and 17th century on ships, their shortage of wood would have prevented them from colonizing new countries, right? So establishing the problem between wood production and shipping could have consequences for colonialism. So it is a problem-centered and a question-centered exercise. So academic research is a problem-centered and a question-centered exercise. Okay, keep that in mind. So what is academic research? It is an exercise to validate a new and original question/problem. All right? Okay? So, uh, if you give lots of facts but no question, that doesn't amount to a PhD. That does not amount to a thesis. All right? The thesis is not about answers, how I will solve poverty or how I will solve deforestation. That's not the way you approach it. What did deforestation, if you're a historian, what did deforestation mean in the 17th century? You know, how it was understood, how it was analyzed, what were the kinds of specific ways of counting or understanding that went into foresters or government, etc., etc. So it is a problem constituting exercise and it has to be validated. All right. Now let me ask, in fact, I wanted to emphasize this by referring to Pablo Picasso's very famous, apparently he was shown a computer in 1974 or so, and he said, computers are useless, they only give answers, right? The crux, the most difficult thing is actually figuring out the question. Again, another difference between school and universities. Schools don't allow you to question the question. It's how successfully you give answers. That's when you're a good student. But when you come to the university, it's a huge paradigm shift. It is now a question-centered learning, not an answer-based response. Okay? And unfortunately, I think some of that is not taken seriously today because with Q8 and all, it's much more of an answer-based response rather than a question-centered approach. Asking good questions is very difficult. All right? So academic research is about the question. It's not about answers. I just wanted to underline that. Now, I also wanted to tell you that sometimes it's more helpful to have a PhD that is a good wrong idea. Even if the idea is wrong, sometimes it's very good because, and I'll cite the paper by Garrett Hardin, published in 1968. It's called The Tragedy of the Commons. He simply said that if there is no property and people have a resource, they will abuse it. Okay? He actually didn't have facts to make the claim. Some of his fieldwork was very dodgy. He kind of imagined a lot of things. Yeah. But that very bad paper, which was a good wrong idea, helped start many, many departments, many, many questions. And ultimately, Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in political science because she worked on the commons. Yeah. So please remember, if you have a good wrong question, well, it's good because it helps others to think. I need to say this. This is slightly out of the script, and I was explaining it to Sahara yesterday. You know, what's the difference between going to school and coming to college? Now we know it's not about college, not about answers, it's about questions. But you know, historically, the whole idea was that when you go to school, you are under the hegemony and the authority of your parents. 3 or 4 years of college is to help you come out of that. This is not a criticism of parenting or parents or family. This is to say that college is the place when you have to learn how to think for yourself. It's not about listening to your professors. It's not about agreeing with what they say. It's not about learning from them. Fundamentally and profoundly, it is about thinking for yourself. And you can do that by learning how to question and ask good questions. All right? And through questions, you kind of build up a way of challenging the world and a way of thinking for yourself. Okay? So just underlining that. Now, what is the most important section of the PhD? Again, not faculty. I'd love for a student. What do you think is the most important section of the PhD? Anyone? Take a wild guess. You know, I often get PhDs to, as an expert to review. And what's the first section I go to? And it really helps me decide what I'm going to get. And like 99% of the instances, I'm correct. But I go for those first few pages always. So this is very important when you're writing your PhD. What do you think is the most important part of the PhD? Sorry? Sorry? The conclusion. Not exactly. Okay, but at least you put forward that. The most important part is the acknowledgements. Yeah? Why? Because from the acknowledgements, I want to know what are the libraries, what are the resources, what are the conferences, what are the seminars, what are the travels you have undertaken. I also want to know what part of which intellectual community you are. I, I also want to know what kinds of networks you have created or part of. And are you in communication with the best in your field, the way you think? And how sophisticated are you in acknowledging academic debts? So if you write an acknowledgement that simply says, I'd like to thank my parents and I'm so happy I have a dog at home, that's not very encouraging. Yeah, right? The acknowledgement section should reveal to us the entire unstated exercise that you did to write your PhD. Knowing people, engaging with networks. Yeah, all right? So let me change that now. This will tell us whether you're an engaged scholar or simply a loner. I want to dwell on this a bit more. There's a big difference. You know, it is wrong to think that the PhD is a cold, silent, lonely process. It is not at all. Okay, it's an engaged process. But we need to know what engaged process means. It doesn't mean loud music and being busy every day meeting people. Yeah, and this is something that is actually a huge problem, a huge issue. And Hannah Arendt, a very well-known philosopher, I think would be someone who would be useful to understand on this question of loneliness. She had a very, both these books have sections on it, and she, at some point, there's a great quote. She says, solitude is the human condition in which I keep myself company. Loneliness comes about when I'm alone without being able to split up into the two in one, without being able to keep myself company. In fact, she elaborates on this distinction between loneliness and solitude. Solitude is the ability to talk to yourself, to never be alone. Lots of people use reading to start a dialogue with yourself. Yeah? Loneliness is what happens when you're unable to talk to yourself. Right? And Hannah Arendt, in fact, argued almost differently as well. She said that modern societies, through alienation, heavy consumption, intense competition, makes a lot of people lonely. And when you're lonely and you stop talking to yourself, she argues, that's the ideal candidate for fascism. That's the kind of emptiness and anger that right-wing politics is very easily able to tap into. So if you notice the television blaring, music playing, people unable to keep quiet, unable to think, unable to reflect, unable to have solitude. In fact, one of the first things technically we try to do in college is to urge you to read. Not because reading is simply tanking up on facts and knowledge and information or knowing arguments, but steadily and slowly building the capacity for solitude. So a good thinking, thoughtful person has lots of solitude, yeah, which is not loneliness, right? Keep that in mind. So when you're doing your PhD, keep in mind that nobody's encouraging you to be lonely. Nobody's encouraging you to stay in a room quietly all by yourself and twiddle your thumbs. We want you to be able to engage yourself. Part of the PhD is about dismantling what is the stuff that you know. In fact, this is a good question to ask. What is education? Anyone? What is education? Education is not the accumulation of facts and information. Any hard drive will know more than you. That means it's educated, right? Technically speaking, right? Education is the challenging of common sense. All right? Education is the challenging of common sense. 80 years ago, the common sense was women should not go to college. Yeah? 80 years ago, the common sense was there was no that being maybe gay or transsexual was wrong, right? Today, with education, you can challenge these stereotypes, challenge these biases. Yeah. So when you come out of home, out of school, out of everyday life, you have to develop the equipment to challenge common sense. If common sense was enough, there is no need for education. Yeah? If you were just street smart and common, the world as you see it, there's no need for education. But because what is apparent is not always real, that's why you need education. I can't feel gravity. I mean, I can feel gravity, but I can't see it, right? But in order to understand gravity, I need to challenge common sense. If I was to if I was born 600 years ago, I sometimes feel like that. The world looks flat. Doesn't look like it's round. Yeah, that's common sense. But through education, through engagement, through rigor, we know that actually that's not the case. So education is the challenging of common sense. Very profound, very fundamental. So now, I think I mentioned this. I jumped ahead of my slide. So who is a PhD scholar? A person who has solitude is in constant dialogue with oneself. Loneliness is a problem for scholarship. Keep that in mind. Yeah? All right. I'd like to now move to another distinction, object-subject. Yeah? Very conventional. We always, we are aware of this distinction. So a subject is full of prejudice, bias, interpretation, translation. That's how you assemble your subjecthood. Yeah? The object is something that has no voice. So often, when you want to study something, you have to turn that into an object so that your subjective self can explore it. Yeah, I'm going to try and explain this in a bit more tricky way. And this happens to a lot of people. When you begin to get into the PhD program, you steadily discover that you may be thinking very differently from others. Even your family people will be the first ones to point out that you're probably becoming a nut. You don't seem to see the world they see it, the way they see it. Yeah? They feel you are estranged. And part of the reason why that estrangement happens is because once you want to study something, you have to turn it into an object. You must not kill it. You must make it voiceless so that you can examine it. So everything will appear strange to you. Why do people like ice cream? Who is a consumer? Is this consumer behavior? Suddenly your family's behavior fits patterns that can be sociologically analyzed. It's not about your family who you know. It's your family that you can understand through theory. Your friends you can understand through theory. Your society, suddenly you've got these lenses that make it look strange. So estrangement, objectification is another serious way, important way in which you study something, right? All right? And so in many ways, interests, politics, power, identity, culture, to study it, you have to turn it into an object. Yeah? You have to remove its voice, and you must begin to study and open it up for the clarity that you will be seeking. Okay. The other problem that I find is the titling. I will say I'm pretty good at this. Yeah, often I get theses, and they always want me to fix the title. Yeah, there's a science to the title, and I'm just going to run this through you. So there's the colon. Okay, you see the colon? Yeah. Now before the colon is the universal aspects of your study, and after the colon is the general specific aspects of your study. Okay, sorry, after the colon is the particular or empirical. You can put it differently. You can put it general and concepts, and specific and, sorry, facts. Yeah, sorry, I did. So go to the right side and look at this titling: earthquakes and tsunamis, colon. So earthquakes is universal. It can happen anywhere. A tsunami can happen anywhere. It's a universal. It doesn't mention the place. A sociological study of disaster management in the Tohoku region, northern Japan, 2011-23. So after the colon are all the specifics: Japan, date, sociology, disaster study. Before the colon is the universals: earthquakes and tsunamis. So when that becomes a book, it can become Shaking Ground and Drowning Coast, Managing Disasters in Contemporary Northern Japan. All right? But after the colon is the specifics, the particular. All right? I'm sure you know the difference between. So my dog's name is Chiru. That is particular. But dogs is a universal category. Right? I am Rohan D'Souza, particular. Men or humanity is general, universal. Yeah. So the universals before the colon. And why is that important? I'm just going to explain that. So this is something that many don't get. The conclusion deals with your universals. The particular is what your introduction deals with. Okay, right? So many people mistake the conclusion to be a summary of the thesis. No. You have to deal with the universal. So the conclusion would be, what is the notion of an earthquake? What does tsunami mean in Japan? You have to give conceptual traction to the thesis. Now, the introduction is facts, place, particular, yeah? Northern Japan, the disaster hit, so many died, so many suffered, this was the disaster policy, this failed, etc., etc. But when the conclusion comes, it must speak to the universal, not the particular. Yeah? The idea of the earthquake, the idea of the general or the universal. Yeah? So keep that in mind. So one of the mistakes many people make, which includes me when I wrote my PhD, say, oh, conclusion is just a sort. I said this, I said, no. Conclusion answers the most important part of the thesis, which is in 2 words: so what? Who cares? You have to answer that question, right? If it is to move as a contribution to your discipline, it must answer the questions: so what? Who cares? Poor people have a bad time. We always know this. Why do you need to do a research on it? If your conclusion is the poor are really suffering, we know this. I don't need research. I know it from just intuition itself. That is why you're poor. You're suffering. Yeah. So keep that in mind. The way you write your title, it's universal and it's particular, and the conclusion, introduction speaks to them in different points. Yeah, the introduction to the particular, the conclusion to the universal. All right. Now, I'm going to something that many of us don't fully grasp. This is by Newton. When he was called a genius, he said something to the effect that if I have seen further, it is because I have been standing on the shoulders of giants. So remember this phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. It means that you are aware of all the literature before you, or at least substantial part. So part of the PhD requires you to be standing on the shoulders of giants. If you want to be original, you should see ahead. Yeah, all right? And at the same time, there's two things I'm very keen to underline. One is, people say, what's your research methodology? Personally, I'm not fond of research methodology because I think research methodology ends up telling you what you were looking for. Okay? Unless it's sophisticated and agile, it can be bad. This is my method, and what I find with my method is enough. Yeah? The other thing that people make a mistake is with literature review. They keep summarizing what people have said. It makes no sense. All right? A literature review is an engagement. It is not a summary. So, how do you do literature review? You carefully assess the arguments and the debates and find the contexts for the works done earlier. So, if I was something like Deepak Kumar's book, if you look at it, the introduction, he takes on George Basala. And you have to be very, very clear that you must not caricature their argument. You must express it in its best form. So he says, okay, Basala's notion of transmission, I have a problem with that. He critiques it. Pyerson's notion of also, science moving out, he critiques that. So he's standing on the shoulders of giants, picking their arguments, discussing their shortcomings, their weaknesses, and moving ahead. Yeah. So literature survey is not that A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's an engagement. Keep that in mind. Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to get into another complicated scenario. What's the theory? What's the hypothesis? What's the fact? Does anyone know a definition of the word theory? Theoretically speaking, we use it very loosely. Yeah? What does it mean? Conceptually, the theory is meant to actually explain and predict. Which is why physicists, they deal with theory, right? This is the impact on a moving ball. This is the velocity of that force of that hit. This is my expectation of how it will travel if I can control the container in which, the context in which it is moving. Yeah. So it's because of theory that we can fly. You take variables, you assess them, and you have a predictive power. Now, in history, for example, we don't deal with prediction. We don't deal with the why question so much. You can't say if these factors happen, Second World War will happen. Unlikely. Our theoretical engagements are of a different size, kind, and form, but nonetheless offer certain kinds of generalizations that are possible. Yeah, the Second World War did not happen because somebody slipped over a banana peel. Highly unlikely. Yeah, so it answers the why question. So whenever you have a why question, it needs a theoretical response. Okay. Now, the second thing, equally important, is the hypothesis. Before you go to the field or before you go to the archive, it's always good to have a hypothesis. Roughly what you expect to find and roughly what your argument is. All right? So I often, PhD students who come to me, I often ask them, okay, you haven't started your PhD, but can you tell me a bit of what you think your conclusion will look like? Already, without any work done, what will your conclusion look like? And that's a hypothesis. Let me say, my working hypothesis when I started my book was that the Hirakud Dam was built to prevent floods, and it successfully achieved that task. But the more I read, the more sources I looked at, I could see that the Hirakud Dam was not about preventing floods. It was about stabilizing a notion of property. Yeah, that's a different claim which I think I might have managed. So it involves tentative judgment. You have to have tentative judgment. Before you start your PhD, you have to have your conclusion in your pocket. right, which you are willing to test, willing to upturn. So it'll be something like this. You have lots of propositions and hypotheses. So if it was Columbus, not a good character, but nevertheless useful for this argument, the proposition and hypothesis was that the world is round and I won't fall off despite sailing away from Europe, right? And if he was wrong, yeah, he'd fall off the cliff, right? But he proved right, right? He realized that the earth, it's not, there's no cliff. I'm going to come back, right? So that was the hypothesis. That was a chance he took at the cost of his, own life. But you test a hypothesis. So a lot of research involves testing hypotheses, even the social sciences. All right. Now, facts are observation without thinking. Okay, right? It's not like Shiv Vishwanathan some point in some context says, facts don't have a story. Yeah, let me see. Yeah. Facts, something that has no story and can only be either true or false, even though you can debate true or false. A fact does not have a story. You fit it into a story. All right? Okay? So when you say the facts of the case, it often needs a story to be completed. All right? All right. So now let me just add this up. Theory is why, hypothesis is how, and facts are what. You need to juggle them. You need to get them into a relationship. A good PhD achieves a fine balance between the three. It's not too empirical, not too factual, and wherever it's empirical and factual, it's given a theoretical conceptual push, and there was a working hypothesis which got tested in the bargain. Yeah, that's how you, walking on three legs, that's how it's explained. All right, so I'm just repeating that again. So theory, hypothesis, facts, and facts and facts. All right, now, okay, one important factor, and this is very crucial, I think even in the sciences, biography is not to be suppressed. We are now mature enough to understand that. Who you are, how you think matters. What your biases are, what your prejudices are, how you understand them is an extremely crucial aspect. The experience of life produces questions. The personal biography answers the so what, and why should I know and why should I care question in the PhD. Okay? Why should I know and why should I care in the PhD? Why did I want to do a PhD in the first place? Of course, it's good for a job, but fundamentally, if you were to understand yourself, you would realize that you have a deep desire to understand certain questions, to engage with certain conceptual issues, yeah, to figure out what it is that makes the world move. Yeah, all right. So this ends up in a very neat triangle: theory, facts, biography. And I'm just, so if I was to read a PhD, I want to see how all these end up shaping each other. Yeah, not just the theory and facts, but also the biography, how it weaves into that theory. Okay, another thing that many people completely misunderstand: analysis and synthesis. Analysis comes from an old style or a belief that the whole is the total of its parts. Okay, the whole is the total of its parts. So, for example, a car, if you take out one wheel, it can't move. So the car moves by the fact that it has four wheels, right? So, but a human being is more, the whole is not equal to the sum of its parts. I will have two arms, two legs, two eyes, the same parents. I will be thinking completely differently than you. Yeah, we are not the sum total of our parts. So when I say I am analyzing this phenomenon, sometimes you might not fully grasp that you are assuming that the phenomenon is the sum total of its parts. when most biological aspects of life are synthetic. It's synthesis. You have to grapple with complexity, right? It's not physics, but it's complexity or complexity physics that is, or chaotic physics that's more helpful. Yeah. So just keep in mind when you use the word analyze, be aware that there is an assumption that you must use very carefully. All right. Now this is important. Your supervisor is not your friend. Really, really important. Okay, right? And what do I mean by that? Sometimes there is a tendency to think of the supervisor as some font of wisdom, as the be all end all of everything, as the person that you need to go to for your recharge. No, that's not helpful. Okay? If he is not your friend, then who is your supervisor? He is supposed to, or he or she, sorry, is supposed to be a node in your network. Reach out to others. It could be your local panwala. If you were studying something to do with locality, you have to create a network. And it looks something like this. A network is highly chaotic. Highly chaotic. Okay? Right? So this is something I need to underline, that, don't treat the supervisor as really the sun around which you are revolving. It's not helpful for the supervisor, not helpful for you. Good mentorship is about encouraging you to develop your networks, many networks. Okay? And by developing these networks, your supervisor is one node in that. They would be signing your papers, giving you hints at the right time, making some suggestions, but do not imitate their disposition. It's not worth it. And I'm going to say something, it might be, it's going to be unkind to me, leave alone the senior colleagues who are sitting here. Most minds get frozen because of the period in which they've asked questions. So there's a time when they do great work, and then the world changes. What was good at one point really fails to grasp realities changing another point. Yeah? And many of their understandings are outdated. And if you take, for example, Professor Deepak Kumar's own quest, he told me, on several instances, how he was constantly sort of not bullied, but he was asked, why are you doing science? This is not history. Why don't you do peasant movements? Why don't you do agricultural societies? Yeah. What is this science business? This is the 60s and 70s, right? They didn't feel that science was a part of historical studies. Yeah. But Professor Deepak was then a young man of a new time, right? And so he did the smart thing of not listening even while he said yes. Yeah. So sometimes if you have someone overbearing, you can say yes, but you're not listening. Yeah. So do not, your supervisor is not your friend. It's part of a network. Build your own network, develop your own node. This is not to be disrespectful. This is not to be dismissive. This is not to urge people to, tell your supervisors, okay, you're just my node in my network. I don't care. No. Respectfully, try and understand your project as belonging to you, not that of your supervisor. All right? And I must also tell you, I've been very lucky. I've had great supervisors. I'm saying great supervisors because I had three. The first one was Professor, this is just an anecdote, Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, who probably became the Vice Chancellor, I think, of Yadavpur University. Yeah. Vishwabharati, yeah. So I had to be released from him. Then I went to Professor Satish Sabharwal, a sociologist, who retired. Then I was given to, I was Professor Indiva Kamtekar. On the last leg, he didn't know what to do with me, and he got a fellowship and he left. So I was really self-supervised, and now when I think back, it was very helpful. Though I must say that Professor Satish Sabharwal was extremely kind. He would read all my drafts. He would, I think one day he told me, he said, Rohan, I I know nothing about floods. Let me be honest. And I said, Professor Sabharwal, that's two of us in the same room. Yeah, because even I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm just saying that keep in mind your relationship with your supervisor has to be professional, courteous, respectful, and yet at the same time, the real achievement is if you go beyond them. If your thinking is beyond what they know, that is your real success. And as a supervisor, that would be my greatest student, someone who's much beyond me. Yeah. And I would like to flag the one of the last problems, the burden of the gift. I don't know if you know this. The burden of the gift is a very peculiar problem. It's peculiar because you can't thank your supervisor. Yeah. Just like you can't thank your parents. Thank you because you're my parents, I was born. No, you can't. Yeah, you can't thank your supervisor because what he or she has given you is a gift that he or she has received from somebody else. It's a long chain of giving, and when it lands on your table and you do a good job, you have received a gift which you cannot return. You have to take that gift and find someone equally deserving and give it to them. Yeah, which is why as a student, you acquire the burden of the gift. It's a burden, it's not just a gift. Okay? You have to now, inspired as you are, hunt out the person who deserves it and supervise, mentor, offer advice, or even speak in public. I am a product of a vast network of knowledge making, and there are many voices in that. And so when I speak to you, it's not that I sat down one day and said, listen, this is what I'm going to speak on and I'm really smart. No, I'm a result of so many of these incredible cultural forces and knowledge making possibilities. Yeah. So when I speak, I'm giving you the gift that was given to me. It's not mine. Yeah. So no point thanking me. Yeah. All right. I think I'm coming to the end of this. Okay. Okay. This is now a really tough deal to tell people. Most people who are doing their PhDs, sometimes, if not very often, there is some sort of minor breakdown. I've experienced it a lot of times. You wake up in the morning, you don't know what is going on. You seem to have an argument, but everyone else seems to have done it. It's boring, it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's going on for 6 years, it's depressing. People in your age group are taking housing loans, they are buying cars, and here you are trying to decide between a teacup and a Xerox. You know, your life is on hold. Yeah, so it is quite distressing. And they often come trying to figure out if they should just give up. But sometimes, you know, I've done 4 years, you're trapped in the jaws of a lion. Leaving now is not good news, yeah, so on and so forth. But let me tell you this, that's because you fundamentally don't understand what the PhD is about. The PhD is not fundamentally about contributing to a discipline. That is a detail. A PhD is not about, in some ways, just working for a job. It's not that either. PhD is a very big game, and you have to decide whether you're up to it. And the big game that I want to tell you all is the quest for immortality. Most people, 2 or 3 weeks before the submission of PhD, have one deep, desperate desire, and that is not to die. And they don't want to die because they're so close to immortality. You have made a great argument, a fantastic idea. It is going to outlive you. You will never die. 100 years later, somebody will come back to that same university and find your PhD and say, this is exactly what I was looking for. So, you know, if you're doing your PhD, don't be ordinary. There is a lot of suffering, but it is the suffering that goes with becoming immortal. Human beings are mortal. Gods are immortal. So it's a big game. All right? Okay? Yeah? So my humble suggestion to you is that don't uh, attempt your PhD if you don't want to be immortal, if you don't want to be a god. Yeah. Happiness can be achieved by being human. Get a job, get a house, get a dog, get a car, ice cream whenever you want. Yeah, that makes people happy. There's no problem, no issues. But if you are attempting a PhD in a serious way, then the quest is an immortality quest. All right? Okay? And be prepared for that. It's not a simple journey. You are going to have to develop solitude. You're going to have to be estranged from society in order to study it. You are going to discover things about yourself that what your parents understood and what your friends think are not true. Yeah? You will become, to put it very bluntly, an idea, a thought, yeah, which doesn't die. Yeah, all right, okay. So on that note, I'm sorry I kept this short. There are lots of other things, but I'll take them up in the question answer session. You know, those who want to do a PhD, there are certain protocols, certain methods. There are certain aspects that you have to complete. But every PhD is also a unique one. Yeah. What works for you doesn't necessarily have to work for everyone else. Yeah. So this is one amongst the 3 million styles of PhDs. Yeah. All right. And thank you. Shubho, you saved me now. It's going to be taken care of. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating and so lucid lecture, starting from what is a PhD and the sum and substance of doing PhD. I wish I had the opportunity to listen to such a lecture when I was doing my PhD several years back. So now I'm not going to summarize. I'm completely against summarizing this lecture. And now the floor is open for questions, comments, observations.
Sir, thank you for this beautiful lecture. As you mentioned so many things regarding PhD. Especially I like that point, that solitude and loneliness, between the difference between the solitude and loneliness. I think that was very important to understand, being that kind of phase in our life. So how do you have any idea how to reach solitude in loneliness, or without feeling it maybe?
Quick, uncomplicated way. It's not difficult to have solitude. You know, it's your ability to have a conversation with yourself in a very honest manner. Yeah. And reading sometimes is very helpful for that. You can, of course, see a documentary film, anything that enables you to think for yourself. Yeah. All right. What one does with social media, for example, it shuts down your ability to reflect. It's like you're passive consumer of lots of stuff, but you don't really know what it ultimately means. Yeah. So a PhD has to, I mean, if you want to be a reflective thinking person, you have to make sure that you are able to have a dialogue with yourself. Yeah.
Right. Sir, you talked about ideas as well, the new ideas.
Yeah.
We should try to focus on new ideas and build up on that. But whenever we study history or read a particular book, we see or perceive the history from the perception of that particular historian. So it appears to be true or exactly for the students who reads that book. So how to overcome that? Even if we have written some particular book, even it is biased or not, they have their own sources to satisfy or justify that as well. So how to overcome that thinking and develop our new thinking in the meat of these things?
You know, I always tell students, don't get your questions from the library. Don't get your questions from books. Get your questions from life. Use the book then to interrogate those questions. Is that being clear?
I mean, sir, whenever we are studying some past years, so we are not present, definitely not present there. We don't have much idea about that phase as well.
You get questions from life.
Yeah.
Life will tell you what needs to be studied historically. Okay. So when Ramchandra Guha went to study the Chipko movement, he realized, he went as a sociologist, not as a historian. He went there realizing that this peasant resistance or whatever movement then was not a sociological phenomenon, it was a historical phenomenon because it's been going on for a long time. That's what took him to the archive. Are you getting it? So life presents you questions. Studying is the way to handle those questions that life gives you. Or reading books, yeah.
Sir, another thing is the accessibility of the sources. That's a big problem, I think, because whenever we study a new topic, we get to know a lot about, I mean, so many books, the names of the books, but we don't know how to get that and from where we can access that book as well. So that's a big problem, even in this age.
Yeah.
So
No,
how to deal with that?
That's a part of the detail. I don't know how to respond, but I can tell you something. As a PhD student, you must work on your networks. You must build solidarities. You must be part of groups. Yeah, you must be able to reach out to a community of people who think. Invariably, they find things for you. You find for them. That's how it's done. Yeah, don't. It's not a selfish endeavor. You build a network. You build solidarity. You build a community through your PhD. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So, that's my best answer for this.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Many things. One of the best lectures I have heard on this subject. And my supervisor, Majid Siddiqui, you know him well.
Yeah.
He used to say many things, which now I could be very clearly thinking about in the light of what you have said.
Yeah.
I have many questions I will discuss later on, but for the benefit of most of us, could you say something more on historical method? How we can actually, if somebody raises the question, what is historical method? How it is different from, you have said that, I mean, in fact, one reference was there that it deals with the past.
Yeah.
But could you elaborate something on that so that we can have a better understanding?
Okay.
At least many of my students could be benefited by that. Yeah.
That's a good question. And let me say that I'm not going to be able to really answer it, but I'm going to use it to speak about something else. You know, interestingly, this is now coming up very often. You're a Marxist historian, you know, etc., etc. You know, the Marxist historians have got everything wrong, and so on and so forth. But history is really a critique of what? History writing is a critique of mythology. In myth, there is no time, right? Nobody has a specific birth date on a certain month or a certain year. No act is of a certain month or a certain year, or even necessarily it's in part of a hypothetical space. Yeah, because that's how myth is, right? It's not meant to speak to evidence, proof, detail, right? History is very committed to the idea of producing evidence, intention, you know, all the elements that can establish the provenance of a certain fact. In fact, you know, when people, what is historical research? Historical research does only two things across, Marxist, whatever. First thing it does is establish the provenance of your source. What does that mean? Establish the provenance of your source. Why is my grandmother's diary irrelevant if I'm trying to understand Einstein? My grandmother's diary is a source, but am I using it to, she never read Einstein, whatever? So it's not a relevant source for understanding Einstein. Gandhi's writings might not be a relevant source for understanding cricket. Yeah. So every source that becomes part of your inquiry and interpretation, you have to establish its relevance. Okay. So the second thing that one does, equally important for history, is separating present from the past, separating time. Very important. So recently, I think I was telling somebody here that, you know, he was talking about Shivaji, and I said, you know, here's the problem. What is Shivaji's Aadhaar number? What is Shivaji's PAN card? What is his passport? And then he, of course, broke out in laughter. Sir, it was not there. Precisely. If I have to be established as a citizen of India, I need a PAN card, I need a passport, right? So I'm projecting notions of Indianness onto the past, uncritically, right? Shivaji, Ashoka, Akbar, they are ingredients of India's history, but they are not Indian. Are you getting it? They are ingredients in the making of India's history. India and Indians start from 1950. When we get the Constitution. The Constitution gives us citizenship. We are citizens. We are no longer subjects of either a king, a monarch, or an empire. We are citizens. Rights, duties, obligations. Rights. Subjects have no rights. Okay? So when you go back into the past, there's no notion of citizenship. There's no notion of democracy. There's no Aadhaar card. You cannot project the present onto the past. Right? So two things you've got to do. Establish the provenance of your sources. Make sure that it's relevant to the claims you're making. Right? Because people lie, surprisingly. And you have to separate the present from the past. Right? By not projecting the present onto the past. So if I say, I want to establish that there was a lot of democracy in Ashoka's time. So I'm going to look for newspapers then. Maybe Times of India. That's a bad way of pursuing, no? Because I can say immediately. So separating past and present, the categories, is a very surgical and significant activity. Yeah? And so if you ask me historical methods, I look for two things. How are they dealing with their sources? What have they subjected it to establish that's relevant to what we're looking at and arguing? And secondly, how do they separate the past from the present? Yeah? Knowing fully well that there's no perfect past and there's no perfect present. But in terms of how we can use language to understand that, it's very important. So as a historian, I make sure that, I have a great, the other, history not only is a critique of myths. Like, if somebody asks in the class, what is history a response? History emerges as a critique of myth. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, they don't have to offer evidence or proof. Yeah, all right? In a broad sense, we can say they may reflect incidents that actually happened. But you don't need time and date. You don't have to subject it to that kind of rigor, right? But if somebody says, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter on cricket, I want to see that. Yeah, right? Okay. So just keep that in mind. These are and the last I would say, very important, what historians do. Historians fundamentally are committed to the assumption that there is no divine interference in the affairs of humans. Only when there is no divine interference, history can be written. The minute there is divine interference, it belongs to myth. All right? Okay? I'm not saying divine interference doesn't happen, but the minute it happens, it is myth. But when there's no divine interference, the affairs of humans, you can document, you can understand through evidence, proof, claims, lies, truths, whatever you want to use that. Yeah? So historians are committed to the assumption there is chance, there is accident, but there is no divine interference. Okay? So you are very secular, you are very, rational, right? And you need a lot of facts and proofs and evidence to back your theories. Yeah? And your theories, of course, construct your facts, but I won't get into that. Is that clear? It's a very basic assumption. It's not difficult to be a historian. It's sometimes just difficult to be intelligent about it. That's all. Yeah? Okay. I don't know. Did I it was okay? Okay. Yeah.
Just because you made a passing reference, and I am aware that you have made it a very as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And you have a lot to say, more so to say. That's why I thought that I I may bring in something more on
Okay.
that point.
Yeah.
Uh, if there is any question from student side, I would welcome that. But if there is not, or if you are in the position of forming the question or framing the question, I would ask you how significant literature could be seen as a source of writing. At no, I mean I'm asking
yeah,
this
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Literature as a source of history writing.
Yeah.
Obviously, intentionality is the factor, and the writer writes differently, and he's weaving the story differently. He's not fact bound. These things are there,
Yeah.
but still, is there any possibility of using literature as a kind of history about which historians have not written or ignored, or those things can be considered important, giving new emphasis on that? Can you see that possibility?
No, in my next life, I want to take up literature. I don't find history, I find history actually quite constraining compared to literature. Literature is the only field, not economics, not sociology, not history, not political science, that offers profoundness. We don't have any other discipline. Okay. I'm very humbled. I feel, I'm in the wrong place sometimes, because literature really discusses the human possibility, which is an amazing, um, what is the right word to use? Is just spectacular, the human possibility, to understand what it is capable of doing, what it has done, its happiness, its suffering, its mind, its joy. It's a fascinating subject. And literature probes that. Yeah. Okay. And so we need to write better. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. And we need to grasp that profoundness also in our. I think, who is it? There's a guy called the pronunciation is wrong, but Thucydides. He's a Greek, one of the earliest Greek historians, and he said, history is nothing but philosophy by example. Right? Okay. So literature is really nothing but philosophy by example. I mean, it's really it's such a shame. If I was, for whatever reason, the prime minister of this country, I would take the defense budget and put into literature departments. Seriously. Yeah. Yeah. We would all be fabulous.
Pardon me if I don't stand.
No, please don't. Why?
So, of the English department,
Yeah.
we have this problem that this is a foreign language.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are delving into the world of imagination.
Yeah.
Practical points are there,
Yeah.
but they are all transformed when we are doing the studies in literature. And a candidate who's offering a PhD needs to be both proficient in the English language and must also be proficient in the area of imagination. That is seamless.
Yeah.
Because you can just move from one orbit into another.
Yeah.
And that is essential.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and thank you
Yeah.
for dwelling on that.
No. Not that I have anything more to add to what you said, but the word foreign is a very unstable category. The Portuguese got us potatoes and tomatoes and papayas and chilies and the Alfonso mango. Yeah, right? Often we say you must decolonize, but nobody mentions cricket, because if you take away cricket, it'll be quite sordid. Yeah, all right? So the foreign, what is pure? As a historian, I'd find that very difficult to logically sustain. Yeah, we're constantly molded, invented, imagined by all kinds of forces. Yeah, and so there's very little that remains of what you think was the originary moment. Yeah, right.
I don't come from Bengal.
Yeah.
You know, I come from a tribal area of
Yeah.
Jharkhand.
Yeah.
So I was often, you know, rather puzzled when the students told me that this is not our mother tongue.
Yeah.
So English evidently is not our mother tongue.
Yeah.
But when we are offering a research in it,
Yeah.
you have to be proficient
Yeah.
in a language.
But ma'am, can I say this with due respect? You know, English captures certain realities.
Definitely.
Munda will capture certain realities.
Realities.
And there are a whole massive capacity of experiences which different languages capture. So we need not, you know, I'm not saying English should be privileged, but I'm
That's
saying,
not-
yeah, I'm saying there are different experiences, different language. I would fund all kinds of languages. I'm not really, I wouldn't discriminate because every experience might be important and worthwhile.
Because the vernacular is very, very rich.
Everything, and
Very
now,
rich.
and now there's comparative literature, and you know,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, we are not sticky about anything.
That's the thing.
I'm so grateful to hear your lecture and also enrich, sir. I totally agree with my colleague, Professor Shoma Banerjee,
Yeah.
because she says that English is a foreign language. But also, to some extent, it was a foreign language. The idea of English being foreign was there some years back, some very many years back. Nowadays, we hardly think of any language as foreign or indigenous because it's all very mixed.
What is
It's
really
all
foreign?
mixed.
What is really foreign is WhatsApp.
Yes, it's all very mixed. In fact,
The short, yeah.
when a producer or a director
Yeah.
directs a film, it happens in many multiple languages. A film can be not just concentrating or focusing on one language, but it has very many
Yeah, yeah.
languages. So nowadays, the very notion of anything being absolute has diminished,
Yeah,
vanished
yeah.
rather. So the only what we can understand is,
Yeah.
be it Sanskrit, be it Hindi, be it any other language,
Yeah.
or English for the matter, or French or German. When a writer writes a novel or a piece of literature, it is the feelings, emotions, sentiments,
Absolutely.
and experiences that come into.
I completely agree with you. Yeah,
into so
totally.
much, sir. Thank
Same
you.
page.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if there is no other question, we conclude this session because all good things have to come to an end. And once again, on my own behalf, I must thank Professor Rohan D'Souza for the clarity of his ideas and the clarity of his presentation, so lucid and so fascinating. So thank you very much. And if there is any announcement, I would request Professor Shahra Ahmed to make.
Thank you, Professor D'Souza, for this illuminating exercise that you took us through, and the chair for this one, for chairing this session so wonderfully. I could not agree more with Professor Basuraj Chaudhary that I wish I had heard this lecture while I was doing my PhD. Okay. Could I now request Professor Hitendra Patel to deliver the vote of thanks?
I think you all would agree that we have listened a very fascinating lecture, not only one lecture, two lectures. Many of you who were not present in the first lecture, it was equally good, I would say. This was more impactful in the sense that it got connected with concerns of ours. And Professor Basurai Chaudhary gave you a great compliment when he says that he wished that these things could have been said before when he was a researcher. And that's a beautiful compliment from someone who is exposed to this thing in a better way than many of us and most of us. I thank, first of all, thank my students for being patient to two lectures in English, good English. And I can understand that their way of looking at research would somewhat be changed, at least modified in the light of what has been said by Rohan D'Souza. He's a very good speaker, and I have always maintained a respect for his scholarship as well as his articulation. And I was telling him that once he delivered a lecture in JNU, and on the basis of that, the impact of that lecture was so great that I voted for him. So, I mean, this is how I respect him as an orator. On behalf of Department of History and Environmental Studies, I should thank him for giving us a display of his energy, giving us 2 lectures in a single day, which is not and with equal energy, so to say. That first of all, I would thank students, then my speaker. I should be thankful to our own chairperson, who has delivered a lecture 2 days ago, and I have been thinking about that since then. There also he had hit upon certain ideas, and I was going back to when Rohan D'Souza says that your supervisor is not your friend. I remember my supervisor told me once, in initial discussions, he said that please remember, a supervisor is not a tutor. Supervisor is not a tutor. And I thought that why he is saying so? Supervisor is not a friend. Thank you for saying this, because many of us believe that supervisor is the sun around which we have to roam around. I think my students would remember that, to develop their own network. And the gift of, burden of gift. These are the words which you will keep remembering, because nobody is there on his own. He is carrying a tradition. He referred to Newton. He referred to many great names. And the way he presented, rightly pointed out by our chairperson, that it was a wonderful way of lucid presentation. Many things could have been elaborated, but he did in a very immaculate way, very interesting way also. I thank the real heroes who have helped these 2 sessions get conducted in a beautiful manner. The head of the Department of Environmental Studies, Professor Sahara Ahmed, deserves a round of applause for the effort she has put in. And I also congratulate the entire team of Environmental Studies. History Department's name is there, but we hardly did anything except our own energetic colleague, Shubhabrata Sarkar, has put in effort into it. So he deserves also kudos for that. And all other people who have been benefited by this great session, I congratulate them for being here, because they have heard something which they will not likely to forget for a while. I thank all the other colleagues of the other departments who are here, raising questions, causing, reflecting on literature and all. And I'm really happy, Rohanji, that you said that history is constraining in a way. The profoundness of literature is something we are thinking about eagerly. As a historian, as a student of history, we should look for these kind of suggestions, remarks, which will be with us. I thank you all, the the people who have done all that, and the entire department team. I'm not naming anybody. These young people have done given a lot of efforts. I thank you all. Thank you very much.